Hey everyone, welcome to Grimshaw's Tavern. My name is Patrick, and I'm the DM for the Pernicious Chronicles. I created Grimshaw's Tavern to be sort of a platform for like filling in gaps and all that kind of stuff. And I wanted to take this time to create a video for a recap on episode 1 and 2. Mainly focus on episode 1 because that's how it all started. As it stands, we have episodes 3, 4, and 5, which have worked out on Twitch, trying to stream all this stuff. But at the same time, we tried 1 and 2, and there was a lot of technical difficulties, all on my side of the house, unfortunately, and I lost a lot of the video, a lot of the sound. So they're not gonna, they wouldn't work right uploading. So I thought I would take this time, like I said, and do a recap on things. Just to give you a little background, because if you started watching these, you're probably feeling lost trying to figure all this out. Some of it you might have picked up on. But basically, this campaign setting takes place 57 years after what I call the Dragon Onslaught. This was a time where all the dragons banded together to take out the humanoid races, and they did a pretty good job of it. They've destroyed entire kingdoms, cities, armies. They just laid waste to everything in their path. The campaign started with a prologue, and it's when we're looking for players for this, I posted this letter, and it was from a woman named Violet. She was a historian for the Great Library, and basically the way all of this started was that the players, or their characters rather, had a history with this woman. They knew her, they saw her on about a 3 to 4 month basis. She would come around in the region, and she would do things like some of them she taught how to some of them she taught how to fight, some to build things, some was knowledge, and they were truly thankful for that, because in this world it was in shambles. Former glory of itself. It was like I said, there's no standing cities. There's no major settlements. People are nomadic. If there are tribes, they're very small. Like if they're just a standard village, really. The economy has fallen, so nobody really has a need for money. Magical items are pretty much non-existent. They're there, but they're very, very rare. So growing up in this world, they were very sheltered, so to speak. So really the only person that they had that they saw that was different was Violet. And like I said, she was kind of their key to the outside world. So they had a general idea of where she lived, and one day she just stopped coming, and that made the characters very worried. So one of the things that I did want to mention is that the characters themselves didn't know one another. They were from different parts of the region that the setting is set in, or the campaign is set in. And they decided that they were going to go and find out what happened to Violet. So the first place they're going to start was where she lived. So they knew the general idea, so they went there. And one by one, or at least they thought one by one, they made it to where she lived. When they got there, they saw this very pristine home. Everything was just immaculate. It was just, things were unbroken. They were used to everything being tattered and ruined, but everything in this house was just perfect. So that they were taken aback by that. And then they find Violet laying on the floor, and clutched in her hands is a letter. So they all read this letter. It's a very lengthy letter, so I'm not going to read it out loud, or I'm not going to read it here because it's going to take a while. It's like 2.5 pages long. But what I am going to do is I'm going to post a link for if you guys want to read it. You can. So I'll attach a link so you can. But I'm going to hit the major points of it. She goes on to say that it's been 57 years since the Dragon Onslaught, and she goes through the history of how all of this started with Scylla Fraximore going through and banding all the dragons together to make one huge dragon army, the good dragons, the evil dragons. And she was so charismatic that no one opposed her. So this is how it all started. Now, why? Well, it's quite simple. They basically were tired of being hunted for their treasure. So they banded together under one banner to take out all the humanoid races. And continent by continent, they worked their way through. And then they made it to Ebelon, which is the main continent that the campaign is taking place on. And then that's when they had a little bit of resistance. So they get down to the city of Dragon's Bluff. And this is where the story introduces the Seers Lyceum. They are an institute of mages or wizards, sorcerers, any kind of arcane caster could fit into this. And the Seers Lyceum watched as the dragons destroyed Dragon's Bluff. And they didn't do anything about it, but they were also planning. So the majority of the dragons go over to the continent in the east called Kalari. While they're there, that's when the Seers decided to take action. And they set up a vortex over the entire continent. And then once they contained the dragons, they opened up 2 portals. One was to the Abyss, home of the devils, and the other was to the Underworld, home of the demons. And the devils and demons came through and just destroyed everything. Anything, anyone, including all of the dragons that were there. There was no helping them whatsoever. And at this time, 57 years after the Dragon Onslaught, the vortex is actually still over the top of this, of Kalari. So that's the gist of Violet's letter. So they get here, like I said, they read this letter, and that's when things start to change. The letter crumbles in their hands, and things around them start to change. The house starts to change, and no longer is it this pristine cabin that they were in, but now it's in ruins. It's, rotten walls, floors, everything is broken, the smell of mildew, and then you can see like marks on the walls of like flashes of fire. So there was some kind of fight inside of this house. And then when they look down, they see that Violet is no longer Violet, but it's actually a human male, about in his late 70s. Now, keep in mind that the other characters aren't around them. It's just whoever's reading this letter at the time. So it's still one person. And then they notice, once upon closer inspection, that this man is actually holding a letter of his own. So, curiosity, they reach down, they pick up the letter, and they read it. And the letter gives a different tone and a different take on the events of the Dragon Onslaught. And I'm actually going to read this one for you. So it starts out. It says, "I truly apologize that you had to find out the truth this way. My name was Michael Versick, formerly of the Seers Lyceum. I intended to tell you when it was time, but I am sad to say that we have lost that chance. They finally found me. I can only hope that they did not uncover my plans to put an end to their madness. Truth be told, the Lyceum is behind it all. While I was working for them some 60 years ago, I uncovered a plot. The Lyceum Council planned to start a war to end the world as we knew it, and they almost succeeded. Their plan was to use a device called the Rod of Dragon's Control to force all the world's dragons to destroy everything. I could never get close enough to intervene until they sent most of the dragons to the continent of Kalari, and only one flight of dragons remained on Avalon. During the Battle of Rydell Keep, the Lyceum's attention was closely focused on the efforts because they were actually losing that battle. As history tells it, a green dragon, Lilitrex, defeated the Keep's army. However, in reality, the Rydell army defeated Lilitrex, and the Lyceum had to intervene. While they were distracted, I took the Rod of Dragon Control and hid under a cloak of magic, which was written by my mentor, the former Lyceum Grand Master Westel. It was because of this that the Lyceum created the vortex around Kalari to destroy the dragons. They knew that the dragons would retaliate if they ever managed to break free of the Lyceum's control. To hide the true story, the Lyceum sent their spies far and wide to spread their own version of the event. Since that time, I have been hiding here, in this region, waiting for you all. You see, I have been working on the ruse of the historian named Violent. But that is far from the truth. I needed that identity so I could find you all while keeping the Lyceum spies away from me. I have gotten to know each one of you very well over time, and that's why you were chosen. I see greatness in each of you, which is why I trained all of you in certain things. One of you has the key to unlocking the path to the location of the rod. I dare not say who, for the Lyceum could find your name, and it could be the end of all of you. They have increased their search efforts in recent days, as reports have begun to surface that the dragons are, in fact, not extinct. The Lyceum fears the dragon's return and will stop at nothing to get the rod. Follow the clues and get the rod before the Lyceum. And for heaven's sake, look after one another. So, they read this letter, and the letter, like I said, they're looking down, they're reading it, and then they notice movement around them. And that's when they look up and notice that the other characters are around them. So the other PCs have just all of a sudden materialized. The fact of the matter is that it was all an illusion. And it was to hide from the Lyceum. To hide them from the Lyceum. So that's the way the story started. They had to figure out who was who, can I trust this person type thing. And eventually they come to explain themselves, why they were there, how they knew Violet and all that kind of stuff. And then they start hearing noises from outside the cabin. They start to investigate. And then they're attacked by these goblins with an orangish, like a deep orange, reddish skin, black hair, and yellow eyes. And not your typical goblin that you would see in this area. So they fight off these goblins. And then they eventually decide what they're going to do. They take a torch. They scour the cabin, get what they want, and then they take a torch, and then they light the cabin on fire, and they take Michael's body. And then they head out through the forest to get to a campsite. And then when they get to the campsite, that's where they kind of like start to figure out what they're going to do next. So they decide that they're going to head north to the Zetas Monastery. One of the characters, his master, is the monk there, and that's where he lived, so he's very familiar with the area, and he thinks that that's where they'll get their next clue. Like maybe he could help them figure out where to go next. As it turned out, basically, the clue was a riddle. And it was written on a piece of parchment that was only showed at nighttime, in the moonlight. So the guy that had it told the guys what the riddle was. They figured out the riddle, and then they decided that the best course of action to figure out where to go next was to go to this monastery. The name on this piece of paper was Howling Wolf Peak, but nobody really knew the exact location of it. And they pretty much packed it in for the night. They figured out who was going to do guard. They actually buried Michael's body, and from there, that's where we ended session 1. Now, session 1 had a lot of information in it, and it had one big fight in it. So the biggest thing that to take away from it was that the Seers Lyceum, or the Lyceum, took control of the dragons, created the dragon onslaught to destroy everyone that opposed them. Michael took the rod of dragon control, and hid it. And now it's up to the party to find it before the Lyceum does. Now, a little more backstory into this is that the current times, the way things are, they know that the Seers Lyceum comes and hunts down anyone that they deem a threat. And it's typically someone that can cast arcane spells over 2nd level. So ironically, none of the party is actually arcane casters. Sort of. Actually, I take that back. One of them is Artificer, but he's not there yet. The other one is a Mystic, and she's not there yet. They actually don't find her until the 2nd episode. Episode 2 starts out with the characters waking up. The person that was on guard had fallen asleep, and they wake up in a smoke-filled forest. And we're like, why is the forest on fire? Well, you set a cabin on fire in the woods. Cabin caught the woods on fire, forest is on fire. So they wake up to these screams of goblins looking for them. Everything is smoke-filled haze. They're having problems seeing, but they managed to navigate north, navigate through an encounter ad setup. They completely missed it. And then they come up to this farmer's house. And when they get there, they start scouting it, essentially. And they determined that these goblins had came up and captured this family that lived there. It's evident because out front there is a wagon that has a cage built around it. And there's a goblin there poking with a stick at 2 women that are actually inside of this cage. So, long story short, our group goes up and kills all the goblins and rescues these 2 women. Well, one of the women actually was our mystic Mina. So they rescued her, and that's when she decides to go along with them. Going a little bit further, the group, they move away from the cabin or the farm, and they come up on this sound. It's the sound of a woman humming, or kind of like a singing, but not really singing. She's humming. Our ranger, Belfire, decides that he wants to investigate a little bit, and he starts moving in. Everybody else keeps moving north, so he kind of like splits the party. So he gets closer to this noise, and he finds this pool of water. Well, he gets there, and the humming stops, and he hears footsteps running off to the east. So he decides to investigate a little further. That's when he comes across a cave, and he thought about it for a second. He said, do I want to go in this cave alone? And he opted out for it. He actually waited and called the rest of the group over. So the rest of the group comes. And they get there, they go inside the cave, and they get attacked by what they find out to be a hag. They actually dispatch of her, but she does take down the fighter. So that was, not a trade-off, but she does put up some resistance. But they managed to heal the fighter. And in this time, as they are scouring this cave that she was living in, they find this chest. Well, there's a knocking coming from this chest, so they decide to open it. So they open up this, and this little sprite busts out. And he thanks them for setting him free, and he explains to them that his name is Roland, and he lives in the tree that's above this cave. This massive tree that's above this cave. But that's his home, and he is somewhat of the protector of the area, but she managed to trap him inside of this, putting on magical wards around the outside of this chest so he couldn't break free. But she kept him alive because his presence was still known to the animals, and she was luring animals and people here so she could cook them and eat them, essentially. So they set him free, they have a little conversation, he heals the fighter, and they go about their way. But they decide to stay, I say they, he goes about his way. They decide to stay inside this cave and inspect it a little bit more, because they think something's not right with it. And then they get to this cave, or I'm sorry, they get in here and they start inspecting this cave. And I'd have them roll perception, and they actually find a symbol that has been carved out onto the wall. But it's not a symbol that anyone can recognize. And doing a little bit more searching, they find a stone that when they pressed it, it opened up this door that had been sealed for centuries upon centuries. So they're standing there, and this door opens up, and it goes down this flight of stairs. And then that's when episode 2 ends, and in episode 3, they decide that they're going to go down these stairs. So that one you actually can watch. But that's pretty much the recap on episodes 1 and 2. I mean, there's a lot more that went down. But like I said, it's a recap. It's the gist of it. So, but if you guys have any questions about it, let me know. And I will see you next time. Have a good one, guys.